Hello friends, in the last tutorial we studied about the request param annotation and the data binding using the request param annotation. In this tutorial we'll be studying about a very important annotation, that is model attribute annotation. Till now what we are doing is we are having the same flow, that is we are having a view, that is JSP file, where the user is entering all its detail in the HTML form, and then in my training form application.java we are getting those values inside my map and binding it to my student bean class using the set method of it, and finally adding that student object in the student model.add object. And after this it goes to the internal resource view resolver, and in the JSP file we are able to access that object. Now what happens over here is we have to write multiple lines of code. If the application is very complex, say HTML form is having 100 elements, then getting those 100 elements inside the map and then binding it each and every element to my student bean class will become a tedious job. So instead of doing this manual mapping to the bean class, what we can do is auto data binding using the Spring MVC annotation. And which annotation is used for auto binding? That is model attribute annotation. When you are using model attribute annotation, it can solve two purposes. Let's see the theory. Okay, so we have the annotation @model attribute. What it used? It's used for auto data binding to bean class. When you're doing it, you don't need to use any request param annotation. No request param annotation is required. Also, no need to add the student object using model.add object. It's done automatically. So this is the usage of model attribute annotation, that we have to write very less lines of code in my application. Let's see, then I'll explain how it is being used. @model attribute. Here you have to give the student1 and to which class you want the data to be binded, that is student. So create an object of it, and this object name will be same as the one you'll be using in the JSP file. It's just like you're adding a model.add object, adding the object student1, and the data binding happens over here student. It is further binding to this object, and this object name will be used in this. This is the replacement of this line, so you don't need this also. Then this data binding which you're doing in the creating the student object and setting those values, that is done automatically when we have used this model attribute. Then automatically the student will have all this line of code, so we don't need to write this also, getting the parameters. So all this is removed, just need to give the view name. Rest all is being taken care by model attribute annotation. Okay, so this is a usage of model attribute annotation. Just use this name. There will be no change in the JSP file because I am using the same object name, that is this. So let's run it and see the output, if we are getting the same result as the previous one or not. It will restart the server. you get your training form. It could be any. So you are getting your submit form.html. Another important point, so you are finally getting this. Next, another important point was this, that here in my training form.application, I don't need to check whether the data type is of date type or some other type. It has done the binding automatically. Like earlier we were getting an error because it was of date type, but map was having key as a string. But here we don't need to need to think of it. Model attribute or the Spring MVC will automatically see which data type it needs to bind to and bind the data. The what actually happened behind the scene is that Spring MVC has multiple property editor classes for each data type. So when the data binding is being happening, like here we are having the name, it's string, so we know it's entering string, so automatically it will call the string property editor class and bind it to that property only. So that happens behind the scenes. We will be studying about this also in the further tutorials. So that's it about the model attribute annotation.